minor arcana, then we'll look at the major arcana, and then we'll kind of like put it all together, and we can even pull some cards. Maybe we can set up another table if we want. Okay, so let's see, the history. So the earliest known tarot cards, and this is like, just indulge me with this like nerdy detour. This part has nothing to do with like reading tarot cards, but I think it's worth knowing. So the earliest known tarot cards are from Renaissance Italy. So we're talking the mid 15th century. And we know that it began as a game, like as a card game, a parlor game. We don't really know at what point they started being used for divination, right? And divination is just using a tool. I should look up the etymology, but it's like using some sort of tool to connect to divine energy. Obviously has the same root as divine and divinity, but it has a connotation of like seeing into the future, right? If you've ever read Harry Potter or watched those movies, like they have a whole like department at their school in divination, right? And so this is a tool for divination. Other examples are reading tea leaves. The ancients read the flight patterns of birds or the entrails of birds or other animals that were slaughtered, like patterns in it. The I Ching, from a very ancient tool from China, throwing coins or sticks. These are all divination tools. Scrying, looking into a crystal ball or a mirror or a bowl of water. All of these are divination tools. So at some point, this parlor game became associated with that technique. Probably, let's see, I even have a date. The late 18th century, if not sooner, from what we understand. So by the 1700s, people are using this for divination. And this card game, divination tool, whatever, I'm just going to use the word tool. I just call it a tool. This tool became popularized and proliferated throughout Europe thanks to the Romani people, who are sometimes called gypsies, but that word is increasingly considered a racial slur. So I'm not going to use that word. I'm just going to call them travelers, right? So there are Romani people that are kind of, a specific ethnic group that you may be familiar with. And then there are also other groups of travelers, in more Western Europe, like Ireland and England, and people just call them travelers, right? So this tool is associated with travelers, and that's how it kind of, it started in Italy, but where is it actually from? It has this vibe of being like of unknown provenance, and there's also what's the word? A theory, I guess, that they actually come from ancient Egypt. And this is probably, from what I understand, this is probably not true, actually. This is a fanciful idea put forth by this guy who commissioned these famous images, and these came out in 1910. So these images are not ancient by any means, although they are very closely based on these images from something called the Marseille Tarot, which has a French name, but I think it's from Italy. And that is like maybe the 17th century, something like this. And so, this guy, his name was Arthur Waite, and he was like an occultist. Okay, so he was like a magician. He was into magic. And he had a group of people, they called themselves the Order of the Golden Dawn. And so you can, okay, so, Okay, so I would have, I wish I had the picture because I wanted to show, you should Google this person later, okay? So Pamela Coleman Smith is the artist who, and if you have the yellow box, there might be a booklet in there. I think it actually was on a card, and I probably kept them in a box somewhere. But anyway, she's this really adorable, interesting looking person who was the artist commissioned by that guy, Arthur Waite, to make these images. And so everybody has called these cards over the years the Rider-Waite pack. Rider was the publisher, and Waite was, again, this occultist who commissioned and who had the kind of like esoteric like history behind what tarot is from Renaissance times and onward. But then the artist was actually this woman, Pamela Coleman Smith, whose nickname was Pixie. She was an Aquarius, and she's just so she's just really, her image is very striking to me. So I'm sure you'll agree. There's this very famous picture of her with cards out, and she just looks like, the stereotype of a fortune teller, basically. And so I use this deck, and I always want to point this out. The ones I've passed out, you'll see have like a plaid background, and then the colors are like kind of primary colors. And that is, is she made into a tarot card? Yes. Okay. Yes. This is the image. She has this amazing, it's like a colorized photo, it's so awesome. So 1910, we're talking about. This coloration here, you can see is like more subdued than the ones I passed out. This is actually like what the art is supposed to look like. And then the brighter colors, I'm assuming, were cheaper to print. I'm sure like this was cost prohibitive in 1910. They just had to work with brighter colors. And so these ones, people call this the Centennial deck, and it has a flower. It's the same flower from the flag on the death card, actually. And then this like squiggle is her signature, which is actually in the corner of all the traditional images too. And more people are calling it the Smith Rider-Waite pack because they're her images after all. Okay, so that's a little history. Is everyone comfortable if I just take this off? I did one of these the other night, and I tried to keep it on. My glasses were foggy up. It's like, oh boy. I'm vaccinated. Okay, so how does it work? Enough history. Like, what do you actually do? So the way this tool works is you want to, before you try to do a reading, you typically want to have in mind what is called a spread. And if you buy a book, or if you have a book at home, or even the little booklet that comes with your decks, they will typically have example spreads in the back. And so here's an image. This is actually an example, okay, here we go. This is what I want. So this is the most famous spread in the world, the Celtic Cross, that many of you have probably seen. It's certainly in the Rider-Waite booklet. And it's in most books that you buy. Some version of it, the words might change. And so this is, to me, this has a total vibe of like association with, the kind of like fortune teller, like carnival roots of this tool. And as a side note, something I forgot to mention earlier before we dive into spreads, and this is important, a lot of our stereotypes about what this tool is, like that we're looking into the future, and that a fortune teller with rings on every finger is going to take your money, those stereotypes are actually rooted in racism against the Romani people, and so we have to do our due diligence in understanding what the lineage is of this tool, and to try to weed out what needs to be weeded out so that we can actually, use this in good faith and have it evolve with us, because it has evolved with us. It's like this modern witch tarot we were talking about earlier with, the like genderqueer biker person. Like that's such a beautiful thing. And part of our due diligence is to recognize like this stereotype against like fortune tellers is, we have to know where that comes from, I guess is my point. Okay, so the Celtic Cross, it's typically 10 cards, sometimes 11. And again, to me, this has an association with that like carnival history of tarot, in the sense that this is like a way to get a really clear snapshot on a person and their energy field at any given time. And it's definitely an excellent way to tap into or tune into your intuitive or psychic channels and really like read for another person. You can certainly use it to read for yourself. However, it's not really great if you're a beginner because it has 10 cards. So if you're like, I don't know what any of these cards mean, and now you're forcing yourself to interpret 10 of them, it's kind of like you're dead in the water, I feel like. And I feel my own experience, and I've heard a lot of people say the same, is like that this is like an obstacle to getting into this tool. And I've heard several people say that they thought that you had to do this. They thought like it's a card game with rules, you know, and like this is the rule. And there's nothing outside of this. And that is very much not the case. There are lots of really cool books out there with a bunch of different spreads. And I really just want to highlight the fact that you can go very, very deep with just like 2 or 3 cards. You don't need 10 cards to get where you're going. In fact, a lot of people, especially when they're just starting out, have a daily practice of just pulling like one card every morning. And then you go about your day and you see what happens. And then maybe you journal in the evening, like, this is what I'm thinking about, you know, the 2 of Pentacles or the High Priestess or whatever. And I'm not really organized enough to do something every day. I don't do anything every day. I'm a Gemini. I'm not supposed to. But if you are, that could be a really cool thing, because I promise you what's going to happen is that you're going to pull the same card over and over and over, like frequently. You're not going to pull all 78. You're going to pull like a handful that are presenting themselves as your teachers at this time, right? And so that's a really, really cool practice for beginners or for anyone. So an example of a 3-card spread, I in the PowerPoint, and again, please email me if you want those slides. I have an example, and I like to give a plug here of a cool resource, someone who has a social media presence and a podcast. And this person is called Lindsay Mack. Lindsay Mack. Her podcast is called Tarot for the Wild Soul. Tarot for the Wild Soul. Her Instagram handle is at Wild Soul Healing. Wild Soul Healing, yeah. Lindsay Mack, Lindsay with an A-Y at the end. And I have an example in the PowerPoint, you know, of a 3-card spread. I put it in there side by side with the Celtic Cross. Okay, so we have this very, very famous 10-card spread next to a 3-card spread. And again, a spread, just what it really looks like in most books, is like little squares numbered 1, 2, 3. And you can do that in your notebook. You can invent your own spreads, and I encourage you to do so. Something like this, you know. And so she invents spreads all the time. And the example that I have, it's like, it doesn't really matter. The details don't really matter, but it's something like Taking the Leap spread or something like this. And it's like, I just pulled it off her Instagram. It's like, card 1 is like, what leap am I being invited to take in the next month? Card 2 is, you know, what energy is presenting itself as my helper? And then card 3 is like, how can I cultivate more trust in this leap? Something like this. And so I use this example as opposed to the Celtic Cross spread, okay, because it really highlights like how creative you can get with designing your own spread, and how you can create a container that will take you very, very deep into self-reflection and soul-centered tarot reading if you create that structure before you get started. So the Celtic Cross, you know, has some cards in it that are kind of like future, you know, like near future, or like possible outcome. That's usually the last card in the Celtic Cross, is like possible outcome. There's nothing wrong with using this tool to try to like see a little ways into the future. The way I think about it, it's like you're trying to see around a corner. You know, the future is always around a corner, and divination tools help us like peek around the corner. But I spend so much time like comparing these two spreads. And again, I'm sorry that we don't have the visual, but because the point to me is like, if you go to your deck trying, I call it doing fortune telling, okay? So if you go to your deck trying to do fortune telling and tell the future, at a certain point, I promise you, you're going to develop a relationship with your deck, and somehow those cards are going to give you information in your, like, you know, your channel, your intuition, like that you need to stop doing that. Stop trying to tell the future. Just try to be in the present moment. The present moment has vibrations of the past and vibrations of the future. It's like time is like a river, you know, and we're in some sort of current. And there's a current ahead, you know, but it's not so much about trying to know what is over there. It's about trying to get yourself like sturdy in your canoe so that you can, or your maybe a kayak's better. Like you're just trying to sturdy yourself in the present moment. So this is kind of like, I even had some quotations and I wish I had them. But you know, you've probably heard this one. Like it goes like this: the best way to predict the future is to invent it. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that is very much, that could be like a t-shirt on the magician card. That's what this archetype is really about. So we're going to talk more about that, about the magician card when we do get to the major arcana, because it's card number 1 after the Fool, who's number 0. And there's really important kind of, what's the word? Principles, spiritual principles encoded in that archetype of the magician. So we'll get there. And none of this is to say, by the way, that like psychic mediumship isn't real, because I very much believe that it is very real. And I've had some very cool experiences with psychic mediums. I myself don't really identify as a psychic per se. I have my moments, but I really use this tool in a more almost like a therapeutic way. Kind of like I'm really into Jungian psychology, and I'm going to speak into that a few times throughout the presentation. So, you know, I always like to like say these things because it's like part of my like desire to do these Tarot 101 programs and to offer this like teaching is so that we can just like demystify the whole thing and make it available to whoever wants to use it, and stop feeling like you have to go to some practitioner with esoteric knowledge that you'll never be like privy to or something like this. It's really not like that. It's a tool, you know, it's like a shovel. If you can pick it up and dig a hole with it, like it's working, you know, if that metaphor makes sense. Okay. And so couple more points, and then we'll pause for some questions before we kind of look at images like more closely. Okay, here's another quote. So this is from Carl Jung, who many of you are familiar with, you know, came after Freud, kind of a better man than Freud, I think. He said, and you probably know this quote, he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So I'll say it again. It's so powerful. I remember the first time I read this quote on Facebook. It was on Facebook. I was like, you know, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is so, I mean, just chew on that. So to me, that quote, and again, my whole orientation towards this tool really calls into, it brings into high relief, I think, the difference between fate and destiny. which are synonyms, basically, right? But fate somehow has this connotation that like it's totally predetermined and there's nothing you can do about it. And, you know, like that would be, I think, like your birth chart in astrology. That would be a not great attitude to bring to that. It would be like, well, I've been this way since I was born. Like nothing I can do. You know, that is not the philosophy behind these tools, these esoteric kind of like occult tools like astrology and tarot. To me, what they're really for is this idea of destiny, which is somehow has more of a connotation of like finding your path, you know, like cultivating authenticity so that you can just like do whatever it is that you came here to do, you know, and that might have to do with your career and how you make money, or it might not. And that's, you know, it's not really about that. It's just about like, what did you come here to do? And so that just as a note about that, like when we pull the death card, or I'm going to find the 10 of Swords, a very famous image that's very kind of gruesome. If you ever, did anybody see that movie Now and Then? And Janine Garofalo plays Janine Garofalo plays this tarot reader. It's like the 60s or 70s. It's such a great scene, but they pull this card and the death card, I think. They pull the 10 of Swords and everyone's like, oh, you know, and it's supposed to mean like someone's going to die. Like, you know, there's like, you know, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. What it means, and this going back to the destiny thing, when we see images of death or destruction, like the Tower card, what it means is that some inauthentic version of you has to die so that the real you can actually be born, like a phoenix style, you know, so that you're like sloughing off everything that's not you, you know, and it's like you almost like with a capital Y. You know, Jung talked a lot about like self with a small s and then self with a big S, that somehow it's you, you know, it's you in this incarnation, and it's somehow like connected to, again, fill in the blank, you know, like your higher power, however you define it. Like we could just say the universe, you know, and that feels like the World card, which is the last card in the major arcana. We'll talk more about that. Okay. It's tough. Oh, Kate, stay on time. Okay. Thank you for indulging my Tony Robbins for tarot. Okay. So crafting questions, and like if you're going to invent your own spread, and again, using spreads from books or from the internet that other people have designed is beautiful. But if you have a specific question or query that you're going to your deck for, and you're crafting your own spread, or even just, you know, one question and you're pulling a card for a question, I encourage you to consider the difference between an empowering question and a disempowering question. This is in keeping with this tangent we've been on about destiny versus fate, right? So a disempowering question would be like, what's going to happen in the future? You know, that fortune telling thing that I was talking about. An empowering question might be like, well, what do I need to know in the present moment? What card is my guide in the present moment? Who can guide me into the future, right? A disempowering question would be like, am I going to get the job that I'm interviewing for? Am I going to get it? You know, an empowering question would be, I have this interview tomorrow. What energy should I embody? Or again, who is my guide? Which card is my guide? Or what do I need to release? I'm big on release, right? As well as manifestation. So what energy do I need to release and let go of? And then maybe what energy should I step into going into this job interview? Instead of coming, you know, it's like anything, you're going to get out what you put in. So if you put in like desperation and panic, you're going to get desperation and panic out of this tool. Absolutely. And the last piece before we take questions is just this point about reversals. So this is something that trips up a lot of beginners and honestly makes people give up sometimes. And it's this idea that When you're pulling cards, some of them land facing up, and then some of them are on the table upside down, okay? So you have something like this. These are optional. There are lots of readers, beginners and experts alike, who have decided that they're not going to use reversals. And if it comes up upside down, you can just flip it. And that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Most of the books, if not all of the books that you buy, will speak into upright and reversed. But it's not like it's not like two separate things that you have to memorize. It's more like when it comes up upside down, it's more like the energy, the key, the spiritual principle indicated by the card is present, but it just has a different flavor, right? So the flavor might be like it's delayed in some way. The energy is like untapped. It's like potential energy that isn't being used yet. The flavor, it could be totally the opposite. It could be that this energy has been present and now it's on its way out. And how you interpret the reversal is going to depend on a number of factors. It's going to depend on what the card position in your spread means, right? I'm tempted to give an example, but I can feel that it could be a tangent, so I'm not going to. But, like the 1, 2, 3, and 1 means X, Y, Z, and 2, what does the card mean? And then the reversal also has to do with the other cards that are around it in context. Like it's a whole, it's a reading is, a spread is more than the sum of its parts, right? They have to be read together. And then ultimately, there's your own access to your intuitive channel or your psychic channels that hopefully if you dedicate yourself to this tool or a similar tool, you will become more familiar with what is going on there. And this is a good time to plug this tool, which is a pendulum, which is a divination tool in its own right. And this is something that I often use in my readings specifically for reversals, because they can be difficult to interpret and they can kind of give you pause. And you use the pendulum to just answer yes or no questions. And so when you first buy or craft a pendulum, you want to calibrate it by talking to it, and you can say, show me yes. Or you can say, is the sky blue? Is the sky blue? And I swear I'm not moving this consciously. Maybe I'm moving it subconsciously. That's kind of an interesting thought, that maybe the way that this works is that people call it muscle testing too, actually. So it is somehow something, my intuition maybe is talking to my arm, right? So that's show me yes. And then show me no, show me no, show me no. You'll see it goes in a circle. It could be just like that for you. It could be different. You have to calibrate a pendulum when you first buy it. And then sometimes it'll just stop. And I know that I'm fishing. I'm fortune telling. If it just stops, I know that I'm like fishing too much and it's time to maybe like come at the card from a different angle, or tell my clients like, I don't really know. What do you think? And so we might have time to play with that at the end too. Okay. But, conclusion on that is that reversals are totally optional. If it just feels like too much as a beginner, I think that's totally understandable. Okay, beautiful. So let's pause there before we start looking at images and see if there are any questions just about the history or the kind of like overview of what this tool is. Yeah.
I have a question about pendulums. What would you suggest to craft your own opposed to buying?
I mostly said that because my friend Gina has this like totally janky thing that she made out of like a washer and string or something. But I mean, really, like what they mostly are, it's something pretty weighted. Like this, I think, is brass or something similar to brass. Sometimes they come with like, it's a crystal here. I tend to like something that's more weighted. It just feels like there's more, gravity to it. And then usually it's a chain. And then a lot of times there's a pretty bead here that you can hold. So really just stuff from the jewelry supply at Michael's, I feel like would be perfect, like a heavier bead. But
there's no specific material that we suggest, or
I'm sure, I don't know, but if you Google it, I'm sure there are traditional metals, and every metal has some esoteric meaning, of course, that I'm not totally familiar with, and crystals, of course. But the other day I was doing something with a witchy friend, and I was like, we need a pendulum. And I was just sitting there and ultimately your body is a pendulum too, and so, and we these are just tools. They're like translation tools. There are lots of really highly psychic people that use tarot in their practice, as in a very kind of loose way. That's just a door into the psychic information. And then it's blah, 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 it's so anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that these are tools for accessing our intuition. So if you think about how does intuition feel, and I actually have done a couple workshops where we actually start there, because a lot of us actually, I don't know, I don't. A lot of people will say I have no idea what my intuition feels like, and then usually someone will speak up and say that, well, this is my own thing, and people have agreed. You'll tell me what you think. When I'm feeling a yes, I feel it in my heart. And if I'm feeling a no, I feel it somewhere lower in my gut or my sacrum or something like this. So that's idiosyncratic, but this is, okay, we're on a tangent. I love the question though. Good. Other questions on the overview? Okay, beautiful. Okay, so, let's dive into the minor arcana. Okay, so most people are holding a deck in their hands. Is anybody not holding one? Okay, cool. So I've got one more here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just keep a few. Let me just keep a few. Are you comfortable? Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So, so at this point in what we would have on the PowerPoint, we would be looking at 4 photographs, okay, of 4 groups of cards broken apart into these 4 suits that I mentioned earlier, right? So if you want to go ahead and just flip through what's in your hand, okay, or a neighbor's hand, if you will notice as you start flipping through, some of these guys, okay, with the fancy names that we talked about at the beginning. We talked about the Sun, the Fool, the Chariot we talked about, right? Again, these are the major arcana. So we'll get to those. We're going to do those next. Okay, so we're going to put these aside and start thinking about these other cards that usually don't have a word on them. Some decks they do. Usually they don't, and they just have a Roman numeral, which is funny because there's always someone who's like, I can't read Roman numerals. It's like, well, you have to start, basically, because that's what most of them are, not all. So there's Roman numeral type cards, okay? And then there are these court cards or face cards. Like I mentioned before, instead of a jack, there's a page and a knight, and there's a queen and a king in each of these 4 suits. So as you flip through, you're going to start noticing, you're going to see cups. They're like these gold goblets in the traditional images. They're like chalices. Those are called cups usually. You're going to see these things with a pentacle, which are traditionally called pentacles, sometimes called coins. So they're supposed to be like coins. You're going to see swords. and you're going to see these big wooden sticks that are called wands, sometimes called staffs or staves. And these are the 4 suits, okay? And they are the ancestors of playing cards, and it's actually very logical. So the wands became clubs, right? So a staff or a wand is also a club, although then they made it look like a shamrock. So that part's confusing, right? But it's a club. These are clubs. The swords became spades. Makes sense. A sword is a spade. There's 2 kinds of spades. There's a gardening spade, and then there's like a World War I spade, right? And let's see, what else? Pentacles became diamonds. Makes sense. Coins and diamonds, right? And then cups became hearts, which you can remember because, or I invite you to remember now, that the suit of cups in tarot has to do with matters of the heart. So that's the connection. These 4 suits have an association with elemental energy. And this is like, once you have this information, this is what I would call tarot theory. So a lot of beginners come to this tool thinking that I have to memorize 78 card meanings. And, and people will try to learn it that way. Like, oh, this means failure. This means, you're coming into money. This means a new love. These very like discrete, I think, kind of two-dimensional kind of meanings. But what we're going to talk about now with the minor arcana, again, is what I would call tarot theory, which helps you to like understand not only the 4 suits, but also all of the numbers, so that you have this kind of like foundational, like a paradigm, a framework for understanding these cards. And once you have that, you could conceivably read tarot with a deck of playing cards. You'd only have the Fool. You wouldn't have all these cards. You wouldn't really have the pages and knights, but you'd have enough for like a cool party trick. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's where we're headed with this. And so, okay, the 4 suits are associated with elemental energies, and these are the 4 elemental energies that are at the foundation of like the entire Western occult tradition, okay, including astrology, including witchcraft and Wicca of all kinds. This is it. And you already are familiar with them. I promise you, on some level, you already like know what I'm about to say. And they are air, fire, water, and earth, right? And so, okay, let's look. So pentacles are associated with earth. And this makes sense because pentacles, coins, right? Earth energy in us and in the world has to do with everything that is material. It has to do with our possessions, with the roof over our head. It has to do with our work and our income, our money. It has to do with our body, right? That's earth. It has to do with Mother Earth. Mater, matter and mother come from the same etymological root, mater. It's earth. And so the way I think about earth and the suit of pentacles is like it's an exchange system. It's like time and energy. So it's not just things that are tangible, because time and energy and money really aren't tangible, but they are somehow material. They have material exchange value. So it's like time and energy go out. Money comes in, money goes out at the grocery store, food comes in, food goes in the body, and it comes out, as excrement and energy. And so it's that whole cycle. So that's earth. So, and normally I would just give the overview and then then drill down, but since we don't have the visual, let's just take a minute now and just casually flip through. And when you see a pentacle, you can just stop and take a peek. We don't need to look at all of them like exhaustively, but just kind of taking a peek, like, Seven of Pentacles is an agricultural image. It's a farmer harvesting these pentacles that appear to be like fruit on a plant. So there, in some of them, they seem like coins, and then sometimes they seem, something a little more metaphorical. So that's earth energy. I don't know why I started there. I guess because he was on top. So one thing to know about earth is that it is considered a feminine energy, or you might say yin rather than yang, right? So the yin energies, while earth is associated with body, and then water is friendly with earth, just as it is in the astrological paradigm, water is like pure yin energy. It's like pure feminine energy. And I don't mean female, of course, I mean feminine, like with a capital F, right? It's like these yin and yang foundational energies that cultures all over the world have talked about. And so water, which is cups, so you can start flipping through and looking at cards that have images of cups. This energy, water, has to do, again, with matters of the heart. So some of the images seem kind of like romantic in nature. That certainly could be what is being pointed to in a reading. But on a more like esoteric level, this is really about like your relationship to your intuition. So your intuition and all of your emotions, both positive and negative, these things are watery in nature. At least that's the idea. Doesn't mean that you don't experience emotion like physically or, or in your mind, or of course you do, but there's a foundational level on which emotion is watery. And so what else do I want to say about that? I think that does it. So I guess, one piece I'll say as we go through the four is just that to me, there's like the traditional like 3D type of like literal meaning where like pentacles represent work and money. Okay. Cups represent relationships and romance and love. It's not that isn't true. It's just that if we really like drill down into the energy, there's more than that. It's more than just these circumstances. Like, right? I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I hope you're with me. Like, instead of work and money, it's also about your relationship with your body. That's earth. Instead of just love and romance, it's also about your relationship to your intuition and your emotional landscape, your inner landscape. That's water. So there's kind of these two, in my mind, there's these like more than two, there's like multiple levels, there's like the 3D world, and then there's something more kind of internal or esoteric. Okay, so water and earth are the feminine energies, and then we have air and fire. So let's start with fire. That's wands. This is, I think of this as like pure yang energy. So this is pure masculine energy with a capital M. It's like active energy, whereas water is receptive energy. So wands have to do, when we pull them in a reading, it has to do with, what your action is, what you're actually doing. A lot of times it has to do with creativity, like your hobbies or your artistic passions or your entrepreneurial projects or kind of like community projects that you're trying to create something new. A lot of times that's what's being pointed to. Sometimes it has to do with your sexuality, right? It's about passion. It's fuego. It's fire. And we know this intuitively, even if you've never thought about these energies before. So pure yang energy. So we can flip through. And I didn't really pause to do this with the cups, but that's okay. We can flip through and look at some wand images. How about the Knight of Wands? That's such a good example. It's like action-oriented. Okay. And then the last one, of course, is air. So air is also considered a masculine or yang element. And it has to do with mind. So earth was associated with body, while air is associated with mind. And so when these cards come up in a reading, a lot of times you're being invited to examine and take stock of your thoughts. It's kind of like, don't believe everything you think. So it's like your patterns of thought, your habits of mind, the way you like process the world, and also the way that you speak. Air energy also has to do with communication and words. And so the way that you speak about your life, like the story that you're telling about your life, that's associated with the suit of swords and air. The words that you're using to speak to other people, and also the way that you're talking to yourself. So like your self-talk comes in. And so, on this 3D level, like a lot of times with swords, what's coming up is, some kind of really tangible like anxiety that you're having, that you're feeling like, trapped by, that you're trying to like think your way out of. Or it might actually be pointing to like your plans for the future, because air also it's like an organizing energy. So there's that level of it. And then there's also this level of like, I'm really into the whole negative self-talk thing. Whenever swords are coming up for a client, I'm always like, okay, let's talk about like how do you talk to yourself? And inevitably we're not nice to ourselves, right? So that's an opportunity when we're working with air energy to examine like the words that we're actually using to talk to ourselves. Okay. So at this point, I like to take a detour into astrology, actually, only to use it as a foothold for this elemental energy thing. So raise your hand if you are aware. Raise your hand if you know what your sun sign is. It's probably everybody. Okay, raise your hand if you know what element your sun sign is. Okay, so that's most. Okay, so volunteer from the audience. Tell us your sun sign and your element. Okay, so Pisces is a water sign. What else? Who else we got?
Gemini also. That's air, I think.
Air sign, right? So right now I'm expressing Gemini, right? Because I'm just talking and I'm having a good time. So that's air. Air is words. Air is talking. Good.
We're both fire
Sagittarius, fire signs. Awesome. Who else?
Cancer, water.
Cancer, water. Leo, fire. Cool. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So yeah, if we looked at the astrology wheel, I had a wheel and a little chart, and it's a detour. You don't have to know anything or care at all about astrology to use tarot, but there is a lot of overlap. And one of the major overlaps is in in our understanding of the structure behind the minor arcana and the four suits and the elemental energy. And I take this detour because my feeling is that even if this is very, very new to you, once you see some of the key words, and I kind of just went on a ramble, but on the slide, like if you look at it, there's like key words, like air, communication. Usually what happens is when folks are told what their element is, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, that makes perfect sense. And that might not be the case because we're very complex beings where we are a lot more than just our sun sign. And for any number of reasons, you might not actually totally identify with your sun sign. And that's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would say a majority of the time people are like, oh yeah, I get that. So that's kind of just a fun detour to think about. And it's more than just like an intellectual detour. It's also an intuitive detour because you can really stop to tune into what it means to be an air sign, a fire sign, a water sign, an earth sign. Right? And so I'll just say them all out right now, just in case you don't know what your element is. So, and then let's, as you hear your sun sign, let's just like tune into that element and see if you can get like something from your intuition, you know, some kind of like, oh yeah, I do know about that, you know, because this is a great place to start with this, all this like Western occult, all these traditions. So, okay, so the air signs, Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. You guys are air signs. The fire signs, Sagittarius, Aries, and Leo. Fire. Earth signs, Taurus, Capricorn. Help me out. Virgo, thank you. Taurus, Capricorn, and Virgo. And finally, the water signs, Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio. So you can just take a moment, go ahead and close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, and tune into your element. And even if you don't remember anything that I just said, just think about what you know about that element in the actual world. How does it behave? What does it look like? What does it feel like when you come in contact with it? What can it do? What can it destroy? How does it interact with the other elements that we've talked about tonight? This is a beautiful place to start. Okay. Okay, the last piece, and then we're going to pause for questions. I'm going to do it quick. I'm thinking about the time. Yeah, we're doing okay. The last piece is these pesky little court cards, okay? And these are tough. If you start flipping through, these ones have the name on the bottom, King of Pentacles, Knight of Cups, Knight of Wands. These ones are tough in a reading. A lot of beginners feel like, I just don't know what to do with these. Part of it is that they kind of just all look alike. And you're just kind of like, geez, it's another guy on a horse. Like, I don't know what to do with that, right? And so this is a place where I think there's a lot of gold in kind of the tarot like culture community these days, because this is something that feels like it's getting an upgrade from a more traditional paradigm. So in the more traditional like fortune telling paradigm, all of the court cards were thought to represent other people besides the querent, the person getting the reading, whether that's another person or for yourself. So these cards were thought to represent other people. And this is like in that divination history of like trying to predict the future or have a psychic, you know, reading of someone who has told you like absolutely nothing about themselves in that kind of carnival setting or whatever. And so it was like kings are like an older gentleman and queens are an older woman. And then it's like, it's so weird. It's like knights are like young men. And then pages are like boys and all young women. Like, you know, it's just like so, ugh. You know, so it's, first of all, it's like super gendered, which is just like, we don't need it, you know. And second of all, to me, it plays into those stereotypes that we talked about at the beginning that are like, they're disempowering. It's disempowering to think that it basically, it encourages like projection. Like it encourages people to project onto others in their life and to give their power away. So, you know, if you're like, a lot of young women are into tarot, you know, like in their teens and 20s, like, you know, we're not like betrothed or whatever. So like every time you pull a knight, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to meet someone. You know, it's just, no, it doesn't, I get it because that's where I started. That deck that you have back there, I bought that when I was 14. No, my mom bought it for me. And that was like, yeah, I pulled the knight and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to like kiss a boy at summer camp. You know, it's like, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but I just think it's cool to upgrade. So, okay, come on, Kate, stay on task. So the upgrade is this, okay? And this one's tough. This is like easier to grasp in writing. So just don't feel, you know, just let this wash over you, this concept. The concept is that each of the face cards, okay, are also associated with one of these 4 elements that we've been describing. So every time you pull a court card, it actually has a double elementation. So there's the suit that it's in, okay, that we've been talking about: cups, pentacles, swords, wands. But then there's also the face card, and they have an element. So all of the kings are air. All of the queens are water. All of the knights are fire. And all of the pages are earth. And you will actually see this in some tarot decks that are often like more abstract art. They will be called by their elements. So King of Pentacles, I just grabbed these by chance, but King of Pentacles would say air of earth. Queen of Cups, water of water. These are just examples. Knight of Cups, fire of water. And I have Page of Wands here, earth of fire. So this is not the only way to read these, and it's not maybe the most kind of ancient traditional way, but I think it's a really powerful tool. I think it has everything to do with what we were just doing, trying to like feel these energies and feel what they actually feel like when they're kind of like up in our field. And a lot of times for me, and this could just be idiosyncratic, I don't know, but a lot of times for me, when these cards come up in a reading, they feel very prescriptive. They feel like they're instructions about what I'm actually supposed to do. You know, especially if the position in the spread is like, what should I do next? You know, a lot of times if I'm reading for myself and I have a card position that's like, what should I do next? Or like advice, it is almost always a court card for me personally, because they're very like active. So it's like the first element, the face card is, well, actually, let me start with the second card. The second element, the suit, is like the circumstances. Like, what are we actually talking about? You know, so, okay, cups, we're talking about matters of the heart. We're talking about emotions, your relationship to your intuition. Okay, that's what's actually going on. And then the face card value is that element is describing like what you're actually doing to work with the energy that's present. So Queen of Cups, water of water, is like you're using your water energy to work on water concerns. So if I pull Queen of Cups, maybe I'm feeling upset emotionally. Maybe there's some sort of heartache, or I'm feeling kind of like depressed or, you know, confused, or like there's turbulence, you know, emotionally. That's the cups. And then the Queen is saying, you know, go get in the bathtub, you know, go use your tarot cards, like dive in, right? Water of water, as opposed to, say, King of Cups, air of water might be saying like, go get your journal, write about this, figure this out, analyze this, right? That's what air can do. And therefore, that's what the kings can do. So we'll pause there. Any questions about that piece or the minor cards before we go to the majors?
I'm trying to understand if you just pick cards and then put them in the 3 spots,
Mm-hmm.
or do you look at them and say, this is what I want to put in this spot?
Great. So I will do a demo if I get myself on time. Typically, it's the former. Okay. Typically, it's that you're shuffling and we call it pulling cards, okay, blind. Okay. However, I love the question because I'm a big believer that this tool, you can wield this tool however you please. So if it is useful to you to flip them over and look at them on the table like this and say, yes, this is me, and to choose it, then you should do that, right? It's like To use my tool metaphor, it's like if I need to dig a hole and I don't have a shovel and I just have a stick or something, if you can dig a hole, like, then it worked. That's my whole philosophy on it. So I love that question. Yeah. Aiden, do you have a question?
Yeah. So there are traditional meanings for each number in a set. Is there a like overarching? I know that like a lot of them, there's sort of like a path that's sort of going through them.
Yes.
Is there like an overarching, like if we can't remember a number off the top of our head?
Yes.
We can kind of be like, we're in this area.
Totally. And I got so distracted by elemental energy because I love that whole paradigm. I didn't even talk about numbers, you guys. I talked about the court cards, that last piece, but what we're referring to now are these numbers at the top, the Roman numeral at the top, and then in the image, the number of pentacles, wands, whatever. And so absolutely. Each of these numbers also has, the way I think about it is it's like a vibration. So the suit is those elemental energies that we talked at such length about that are the same as astrology. Like those, to me, those are the building blocks of reality. And then there's the fifth element, which is spirit or ether, right? So those are like, that's like everything in the universe. It's similar that, in the Eastern tradition, they also have these elemental kind of paradigms for understanding. And then they have yin and yang, right? So kind of similar idea. It's like, it's quantum in a way, like everything is made up of these elements. Okay. But then the way I think about the numbers is that that's like a vibration or a frequency at which that element is operating. And that is actually, and that's why I'm so big into really like tuning into your lived experience of these elements, because that's how you become a really effective reader, I think, is that you're not just like, oh, I've memorized what's in this book. The books are part of it, but it's also about like just tuning into how each card feels. So I'll just give one example. We don't have time for all 10 numbers, but an example would be, let's think about the number 5. So I would love to find the 5 of swords. That's what I really want to find. Of wands. So the number 5 typically has to do with challenge or like strife, or I really associate it, honestly, these days with like trauma and triggers. So that's a key word for me in 2021 with the number 5 in all 4 suits is like triggers. So this is just an example. So when I'm doing a reading and a 5 comes up, what I'm going to share with the person, in whatever way feels, safe. I'm not going to like ask, hey, what's your trauma? But in whatever way feels appropriate with the person, we're tuning into this feeling of, it's almost chaotic 5. It's like 5 is like, there's a lot going on and you have to mediate. So in this case, it's fire. So the 5 of wands is like, oh my gosh, there's all this fire energy and I have to mediate it. And you could see it's like people fighting in this traditional image. So this is just an example. And we'll definitely try to keep in touch with me, because part of what is in the PowerPoint is just like a cheat sheet. Like this is the ace, this is 2, 3, 4. It's just like keywords, which I totally like swiped from these books. I have these charts that I've just adapted. Like I'm a researcher, nothing I'm saying is my own really. This is just from the history. Okay, beautiful. Other questions about the minors? Okay. All right. So we're looking at the major arcana. I do want to just put a plug here that it's 7:53. So I don't know. I think on Facebook we said that this was going till 8, but then somewhere else we said 8:15. And so,
As long as we have to close the building at 8:30.
Okay.
So as long as people are out of here by 8.
Yeah. Okay.
25 or so.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah. So if you have a hard stop and you need to get out of here at 8, don't be shy. Please do that. And you can come up and totally grab one of my cards so that you can email me if you would like, more material to hang on to. The slides, the cheat sheet that I just referenced, that's all for you. I'm happy. I want to share that with you. Okay. But we're coming into, at the very end, we're coming into the most important part, of course. I'm terrible at keeping time. Always have been. That's okay. We're talking about the major arcana. Okay. So again, these cards are, when they come up in a reading, they're really pointing to like whatever is going on a deeper level for the querent or for yourself, if you're reading for yourself, something that's going on that, again, it's like something that's happening to your soul. And so it's manifesting in the circumstances of your life. Like you're usually, whatever the energy of the major card or cards is, it's kind of like a fractal, or it's like a hologram or something, where like each little piece reflects the whole thing. So it's like you're seeing it everywhere, basically, if you know how to look for it. It's not always obvious where these things are showing up, but the idea is that they're like permeating in this really kind of juicy way. And what these cards are, we can use the word archetype. Okay. And so it's not that there isn't archetypal energy or archetypes being kind of depicted in the minor arcana. There are, but I think if you look at these images of the major arcana, I think you'll know what I'm getting at. Like, for example, the magician, the fool, these are great examples. Also, like the emperor. Okay. So the idea here, the word archetype was actually coined by Carl Jung, and it means an archetype is like a primordial like type. Usually they're kind of like human figures. They're not always. They can be like animals and stuff like that, but a lot of them are like types of humans. So a magician, an emperor or a king, a fool or a court jester. They're like these types. They're like characters that Jung said in his kind of theory of human psychology. He said that these things are primordial. They're ancient. They're from prehistory, and that they are a part of what he called the collective unconscious. So the idea is that just by virtue of being a human and being born into a human society, you have access to these energies in your psyche, in your mind and your emotions and your psychic intuition type spaces. Even if you grew up like in, the middle of the Amazon, or like in Siberia, like people who live in like isolated, uncontacted communities, anybody who's in a human community, he said, had access to these. And if you think about it, he's really onto something, because people all over the world have shamans. That's the magician. People have hermits and kind of like weird people in their community that are like, and they might have a different word for it. This is English, hermit, but it could be anything. It could be called any number of things. People everywhere, no matter what, have death, right? That one we know for certain. So that's the Jungian idea. These are archetypes. And when we get one in a reading, if we can really tune in not only to what we're reading in our book or our resources, but also to the information that we're receiving through our own intuitive and psychic channels, a lot of times what happens is that, and it's not every time you pull a major card, but there's an invitation every time you pull one to really like work with it for an extended period of time, maybe like a couple weeks or something like this. So the minor cards come and go. They're like, what happened today? What happened at work today? Like stuff is coming up. But it's almost like the major cards are, when they come up, it's like a lot of times it's like they're stepping forward to say, like, I'm your guide, I'm your teacher. And what ends up happening, this is particularly when we're reading for ourselves, for personal growth and like maybe using a journal as well. A lot of times what happens when we really get into this practice and we really kind of say yes, like in a big way, like we're really kind of open, which isn't always easy, because when our intuition and our psychic abilities start to open, it's usually pretty scary. So that's just part of the game, I guess. But what starts to happen, this is a Jungian thing. He also coined the word synchronicity. He gave us the word synchronicity. So synchronicity is like when a couple things that seem unrelated are just so uncanny and weird that you're just like, how could that be? So here's a classic example. You're talking to someone and you say, I really haven't thought about my friend Betty in so long. I wonder how she's doing. Bring, bring, your phone rings. It's Betty, right? That's a classic example. Like, what? How did it happen? Sometimes these cards, that's how these energies speak to us. Jung said that synchronicity occurs in the presence of an activated archetype. Synchronicity occurs in the presence of an activated archetype. So this piece is a little bit woo-woo. It's a little bit of a tangent that you might be thinking like, I don't really get it. But I like to weave this piece of it in because I think, first of all, the Jungian dimension I think is really interesting and just kind of like cool. And second of all, I feel like it helps us kind of like see how this tool could kind of ripple into your daily life. So it's like you pull the high priestess, but then she follows you around for like weeks, and you start to see her, or in images, like you see, you just see like a poster for a concert at the press room or something, and it's this image, and you're like, that just reminds me of it. And sometimes you don't even know why. You're like, it doesn't really look like that tarot card, but I'm just feeling it. And so I'm just weaving that in because it's kind of part of how this works. And one piece that I think is worth, okay, we're good. We're good. Another piece that I think I like to weave in here, that's something that you could really hold on to and really kind of like really chew on this piece. You're not just gonna like understand this in one night. This is a big part of the journey. And it's going back, I promised we would look at the Magician card. So this is such a famous image. This is on the yellow boxes that you see. This is card number 1. As I said, the Fool is 0. What is being illustrated in this classic image is this really important spiritual principle that's kind of in keeping with this whole archetype, synchronicity, like detour that we're on. And the principle goes like this. You might have heard it. It says, as above, so below. As above, so below. And you can see that with the magician's hands. Let's see. I guess he has his right hand up and his left hand down. As above, so below. And so what this principle is describing is this very strange way, this kind of indescribable way in which the universe, it communicates like heaven and earth communicate, right? The universe, the spiritual realm, the etheric realm, what have you, however you want to describe this kind of like the cosmos, however you want to describe like up, whatever's up there, or some people like the phrase like, beyond the veil. So whatever is on the other side of the veil, the Irish called it the other world, like whatever is in the other world, that's above. And then there's our world here. We're here, we're in Dover, we're at the library, like this is below. And we are in the middle. We are in the middle. We are actually a bridge between heaven and earth. We are a conduit for this totally indescribable, uncanny, bizarre, mystical energy. And you don't really have to, the thing is, you don't really have to subscribe to any like belief system. It's not like a religious thing that I'm describing. You can use whatever words you want, but it's this idea that like the universe is trying very desperately to communicate with you right now. We're all connected. We're connected to each other, and we're connected to like all of it, and it's this idea of like a hologram, or a holograph or a hologram. I always forget. But if you look that word up in the dictionary, it's so strange the way it's described. It's like a holograph is like an image where every part of it contains the whole. I don't even know what that means. I just keep seeing places, we live in a holographic universe. I'm like, oh, cool. That sounds really cool. I like that. And I think that's what the magician card is getting at, and what this tool is getting at. So this as above, so below thing, when you pull a major card, it's like there is really powerful archetypal energy that is present in your psychic field that wants to be witnessed by you. It wants to be observed by you and invited into your, lived experience, your channel. And then you become the channel, and then you can do really cool stuff with it. You can make magic. One definition of magic, famous definition by Starhawk, this wonderful kind of elder in the witchcraft world, Starhawk said that magic is changing consciousness at will. Magic is just changing consciousness at will. That's all it really is. And so all of these major cards, this is the principle that we're working with, that there's powerful magical energy that's present in your field that wants to be translated through you as the channel and made manifest, made material in some way. And a corollary of this, not a corollary, but a related concept, there's as above, so below, and then there's as within, so without. So when we take these energies, when we say yes to these energies and we like work with them and read about them and talk to them and really work with the cards, things start to change in our internal landscape that have profound effects on the people that we love and the outside world, as within, so without. So I realized that, a lot of what we've been talking about with these major cards is like theoretical in nature. I've been talking about like a philosophy, basically, as opposed to the meanings of the cards. That is something there's a cheat sheet for that's available. If you reach out to me, I'm happy to give you the cheat sheet that gives you key words. For example, a famous image, the tower, a key word might be upheaval, right? But part of what I think is so interesting about when you start this journey of working with these cards is that you don't need me to tell you that. You can already see that this is an image of upheaval. You already know. That's what is so moving and beautiful about this Jungian theory stuff, this idea that archetypes are actually your birthright. They're actually a part of your psychic DNA. All we're doing is just kind of activating those faculties, which we're not accustomed to talking about kind of in like the top side world, like the day-to-day 9 to 5 or whatever. The last piece I'll weave in, and then we'll have some time for questions and maybe some more like practical type questions. The last piece is that there's a really useful way to think about these major arcana cards, just like our question about the numbers with the minor arcana. These cards are also numbered. The Fool is 0, the Magician is 1. There are 22 of them altogether, a powerful number in numerology and Kabbalah. 22. So starts with 0, therefore it ends with 21. That is the world. And we can kind of understand these archetypes through what is known as the Fool's Journey. And you probably have heard that before, some of you. So the journey begins with 0, the Fool, it ends with 21, the World. We, of course, don't go through this journey in a linear way in life. Life is not linear. If anything, it's like the spiral or something. But we can kind of understand these energies, or like learn them through this this framework that's called the Fool's Journey. And I believe that phrase and this concept was coined by Mary K. Greer, who's a very famous tarotist. And I do have one of her books, if not 2 of them here. And so, we are running out of time, but I just encourage you to go ahead and Google that phrase, the Fool's Journey. And that can be a really cool, if you can get your hands on her languaging about that, Mary K. Greer. She has like a cheat sheet list of these cards, but it's all told like a story, basically. And it's basically like, once upon a time, you take a leap of faith, and that's the Fool. And then it goes from there all the way through. And that's a really cool way, I think, to start to learn these cards that kind of gets you away from like, oh, I have to memorize these keywords. It's honestly a more intuitive and kind of like down to earth way of accessing this story that unfolds from 0 to 21. So the Fool's Journey, Mary K. Greer. Okay. Any questions about, maybe specifically about the major arcana, or some of the kind of, the detour, the Jungian like detour? Questions about that stuff? Okay.
In this thing, there's trumps. There's not pentacles.
Okay. No. So what Bill has over there is another type of tarot deck, which is called the Thoth or the Thoth tarot, which is totally way into that whole ancient Egyptian thing. I think was Thoth like related to Mercury? I forget. It's a god. It's an Egyptian god. Different imagery. So basically, like most tarot decks, if not all tarot decks, honestly, 78 card tarot decks are either inspired by this lineage, which is the Rider-Waite lineage, which goes back to the Marseille tarot, or they're inspired by that lineage. The trumps are the major arcana. Yeah, it's not a suit. I think you might have coins instead of pentacles.
Okay.
I think it's called coins. Yeah. So yeah, these are called trumps. Unfortunate name, trumps. Beautiful. Questions about the trumps? Other questions? Yeah.
Brand new to this whole thing.
Yeah.
I see a death card. Does that always mean death?
No, it doesn't. So great. And I failed to mention that. I usually use that as an example of kind of, let's go back to this like as above, so below thing. Like, what is she talking about? What we're talking about, what is wanting to be seen by us, that whole thing, like this powerful energy. The way I see it, and this is my own thing, but the way I see it is like, there are like many possible timelines of my life. And my job is to always be choosing the most authentic one. That's like I said at the beginning, like it's actually me. Like I've actually sloughed off everything that's not me. And that's what is dying. That's what's dying. It's not that someone's going to get hit by a bus. Somebody might get hit by a bus. I mean, that people die. Like that is real, right? But it's like some version of you, or some like weird projection that you have about like, like some victim mentality maybe about like my life is, that's what's dying, so that you can actually just like be reborn. So the death card is about transformation, is what it's really about. Great question. Yeah. Yes, I love that. It's ego death It's ego death. Yeah. And that is actually a beautiful part of what Mary Kay Greer wrote about with The Fool's Journey, that the first part of the journey is developing the ego. You know, because having a healthy ego and sense of self is a really important thing. Like, that's not to be diminished. But then what starts to happen towards the middle of the journey, where we get to the death card, is ego death. And then what happens at the end, as we move towards the world card, is like higher consciousness. It's going back to that everything's connected thing that we were talking about, that somehow you have a healthy ego and identity, and you see that, like, you're just a part of the universe. You know, you're not better than anybody, right? Other thoughts? Yeah.
That also ties into more Jungian psychology with Jung goes from the idea of you have this ego, your conscious self, to a superego, which is like your expanded higher conscious.
Yeah. Self with a little s, self with a big S. Yeah. And part of it, in his theory, we have to get there through what he called individuation, right? So, like, you have to individuate from your parents at various stages of development, toddler, you know, teen, whatever. But even in your adult life, like, that process of individuating continues. But the goal is not so you can be like, this is my ego, right? The goal is so that you can be of service. I think the goal is so that you can actually be of service to the world and understand, again, like, what it is that you came here to do. And that's a moving target. That's not like one thing that changes. Okay, so it's just about 8:15. So we will wrap up. What we didn't quite get to was kind of like a demo of how you would do it. So, you know, my feeling is, don't believe anyone that tells you there's a rule about it. My big piece of advice to you is just to create a ritual. Just create a ritual that you repeat every time, that involves tools, a candle, whatever, and involves the way that you like to shuffle the cards and start pulling them. And my ritual, and this will be my last piece, my ritual involves shuffling, and I light a candle and I do this stuff. And then I use what people call the knock method, where I take my non-dominant hand and I knock the cards, and I cut. Usually I get more than one. I cut the cards like this. So that's an example. Some people like to go like this, right? So there really are no rules. The important thing is that you're creating, a ritual technique, and also a ritual space, like a space that's where the candle is so important, that you're creating a space that's like not normal life. You know, you're not just like pulling a card like while you're brushing your teeth in the bathroom or something. You know, you're pulling a card like at your little altar with your special candle, so that you can actually enter, you know, an oracular mode that's outside your daily life. So we're wrapping up, literally. Here we go. Thank you all for bearing with our, like, you know, yeah.